They might be paying something, but when you take the overall impact, the Americans are gaining tremendously.
So on yesterday's show, we reported on the Supreme Court hearing testimony regarding the legality and the constitutionality of Trump's tariffs. So just a super quick recap in case you missed the show yesterday. If the court decides that Trump's tariffs are essentially taxes on the American people and American businesses, something that Chief Justice John Roberts actually admitted to, then the tariffs can be ruled unconstitutional since only Congress is allowed to impose a tax like that on the country. And if that happens, then the federal government could be required to pay back all of those tariff/tax dollars that it took in. Of course, the process of that payback, if we get to that point, could be very complicated for a number of reasons. Also, the money would likely go back to the businesses that raised prices on consumers, not to the consumers who ended up paying those increased prices. So anyway, there's a lot going on there, but amidst everything, Trump is busy trying to convince the American people that they are not actively being screwed out of their own money as a direct result of his policies, including but not limited to his tariff policy. But in a press conference yesterday, he was confronted with Robert's stance that tariffs are taxes. And in his response, he admitted that the American people are in fact paying something. The whole crux of his argument for the tariffs in the first place, the way that he sold it to the American people, was his assurance that no, we would not be paying the tariff tax. It was all a lie. We, along with many, many others, said that it was a lie at the time, but not everyone listened. I always tell my husband, nobody listens to me. And maybe sometimes they should. So now, along with his concession that the people are paying for the tariffs, he says that that's just the price that we pay as the American people for like military and stuff. So let's hear more of Trump's response.
It really is a defensive mechanism. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be unable to defend ourselves.
So then do you agree then that Americans are paying those tariffs?
I think, no, I don't agree. I think that they might be paying something, but when you take the overall impact, the Americans are gaining tremendously. They're gaining through national security. Look, I'm ending war because of these tariffs. Americans would have to fight in some of these wars. They're gaining in national security. They're gaining in economics. They're gaining in so many different ways. And they're gaining in self-respect for our own country. Other countries used to laugh at us. They would charge us tariffs. Japan was charging us massive tariffs, and yet they wouldn't allow our cars to be sold in Japan.
So over on MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell responded to what the president had to say during that same press conference. Trump was later asked about the potential of paying back the tariff income, and Trump kept saying that the government has taken in trillions of dollars. He said it repeatedly.
We have to pay back trillions of dollars. We've taken in trillions. We haven't taken in billions. We've taken in trillions of dollars.
That is a lie. That is actually trillions of lies. The total amount of tariff revenue collected by the United States Treasury this year is $495 billion. That is roughly the same amount that the Internal Revenue Service refunds to taxpayers in a typical year. The Treasury knows how to refund billions of dollars when it takes too much money from people. In fact, Donald Trump's Justice Department lawyers, in appealing the Trump tariff case to the United States Supreme Court, assured the appeals court and the Supreme Court in writing that they could easily pay back the tariffs if they lose the case.
So O'Donnell also said that the Treasury has, quote, very precise records of who paid what amount of tariffs, so they should be able to make some headway on those paybacks. Again, it's unlikely that the consumers who were the people who paid those tariffs would get their money back, but that the companies that raise their prices in response to the tariffs would be the one getting some sort of payback for all of it. And I'm not blaming small businesses for raising their prices to cover tariffs. They did what they had to do to stay open, but a lot of those businesses didn't survive, right? A lot of businesses were not able to open. So like, how do you pay those people back? So over on CNN, Anderson Cooper spoke with former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin about the case, and Toobin agreed that paying back the tariffs would be a quote unquote tremendous logistical problem and fiscal problem. But he also mentioned the possibility that the Supreme Court could rule the tariffs to be illegal, but then not require that the money be paid back. So what are your thoughts on all this? Is the logistical nightmare of it all worth the nightmare of it all? And keep in mind that we're running with just part of the government that we once had prior to Trump taking office.
Just a couple of things. First of all, everybody, and we said this up here at TYT pretty much from the beginning, that the tariff is a tax. And not only is it a tax, it's a regressive one in the sense that because these taxes, like a sales tax, are a bigger proportion of poor people's income than other people's, that makes it regressive, right? Like they bearing a bigger burden of these taxes than other people. And so, yeah, that was a horrible component from the beginning. Another thing that folks need to know is that the Supreme Court, in the opening arguments, 6 of the justices seem to be extremely hostile to Trump's tariff regime in the case for it. Which means like they're signaling like, we're gonna strike your tariff regime down. And why that's important, it's because the business community has hated capital, has hated the tariff regime from the beginning, and that's why it's getting struck down. And third, what people need to know is that they will find a way to remunerate the biggest businesses that were affected by this. And those folks, they're not gonna pass that on to their workers. They're not gonna pass it on in savings to the consumers. They're gonna give it back to the shareholders in the form of stock buybacks, and on it goes. So like, yeah, I think it's a great thing that the tariff regime will come to a close, but we know this is only happening because the people who rule our economy do not like the tariff regime.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make because, this government, this particular government, and that includes the Supreme Court, they do very little for the actual American people. They do a lot for corporate and business interests. They do a lot for the millionaire and billionaire interests and for the Trump interests. So whatever Trump wants, he tends to get in some way, shape, or form. And if he doesn't want to pay back that money, I find it hard to believe that he will have to in some form, but also who is it going to get to? And like we can't undo the damage completely of what has already been done in a situation like this. Because as I mentioned, like the money's not going to get back to the people who actually paid it. And it's, the businesses that already went out of it, it's just too much. But I think they need to try. But as I did mention, Doge cut a lot of people from our government. So a lot of the people who would be working on something like that, we just don't have the workforce anymore. But you know what? A lot of people have a lot of faith in AI, so maybe that can be helpful around now. So I'm being facetious, by the way, if that wasn't clear.